Week 15 of the fantasy football season. His quarterback start sits every matchup with playoffs starting this week. The first matchup Thursday night, Los Angeles Rams at the San Francisco 49ers. Matthew Stafford to start. What a ball game it was for this Ram team last week in an up and down the field shootout between them and the Buffalo Bills, where Stafford, he had a big ball game. And when you got guys like Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua that make everything easier in the passing game, they're going to get yards, they're going to make plays, and they're going to find the end zone. And this week, I know it's a tougher matchup at division rival, but we know these Thursday night games are usually high scoring. And this 49er defense obviously isn't playing to the level like they have in years past. So I think Matthew Stafford, he goes out there and he has a good ball game, and with his gunslinger mentality and two great wide receivers, more weeks than not, he's going to put up some decent numbers. Brock Purdy, a start in this one. He's been locked in for the majority of the season. I know he took a big hit towards the end of the game last week in a blowout victory versus the Chicago Bears. Got everyone going, even with Christian McCaffrey out. George Kittle, he's going to have a big game. You know, Juwan Jennings, he's been a favorite target of his. I know Debo, his numbers are definitely down, but Brock Purdy's finding ways to get other plays involved. And this 49er team, they're still a high-powered offense, even with Brandon Ayuk, who's obviously out for the season. Christian McCaffrey out for the season, but Purdy's going out there and still putting up productive numbers, and this could be a high-scoring game between these two teams. Kansas City Chiefs at the Cleveland Browns. Mahomes, he's a start. Obviously, his numbers aren't great this season is Patrick Mahomes, but he don't care about numbers, obviously. It's about winning. Chief team, obviously, 12-1 on the season. So Mahomes, his fantasy points anywhere from that 18, 23-point range. And now with Pacheco back in the lineup over the last couple of weeks, he's going to get more touches, and those numbers are going to go up. But this week at Cleveland, a defense that can't stop anyone, I have Mahomes as a start. Jameis Winston to sit. This is going to be a tough ball game, I believe, for Jameis Winston. But you just never know with Jameis Winston. We saw a couple weeks ago versus defense like Denver go out there, go for 497, 4 touchdowns, but he did throw the 3 those. But I think this Chief defense all season long, they've been holding quarterbacks down for the most part, and Jameis Winston taking a lot of sacks, and his turnover outlets over his career has been a problem for him. So this week versus the Chiefs, I don't see it being a good matchup for him. Cincinnati Bengals at the Titans. Joe Burrow, what a season it's been for him. I know it's a 5-8 year for Cincinnati, but it's not his fault. This offense is putting up pretty much 30-plus point games weekly. Joe Burrow every week, 300 yards, 3 touchdowns. It seems like he goes out there and gets in this week in a great matchup at Tennessee. I'd expect more of the same once again. Will Levis, Mason Rudolph, whoever starts this game, they're both sits. Levis took a big hit, even though he gutted it out in the second half of that ball game, but he's banged up and not in great shape, so it wouldn't be surprising if Mason Rudolph starts this game. I know the Cincinnati defense isn't good, but you really got to go deep in these leagues, especially if you're like in a 2-quarterback league. Maybe if you had injuries, I could see you starting these guys, but obviously your regular leagues and just on consensus alone, you're not going to start any of these quarterbacks. Commanders at the Saints, Jaden Daniels, he's locked in as a start each and every week. Coming off a bye week, I think is going to help him big time after he's been dealing with a rib injury on and off for the last month and change, is Jaden Daniels. And this week in a matchup in New Orleans, where I don't think the defense is totally bad, but they're definitely beatable. And in the Dome as well, I think we could see points put on the board by Daniels early and often. Jake Haener, Spencer Rattler, whoever's going to start this ball game for the New Orleans Saints, I have no interest in starting. We saw Rattler early in the season, and he could run the football, no doubt about it, but a lot of interceptions, taking too many chances. And this Commander defense, I know, isn't all that great, but I believe they could go out there versus a depleted offense, pretty much lock them down. So they're both easy sits. Baltimore Ravens at the Giants. Lamar Jackson, he's a start each and every week, MVP candidate. Again, him and Josh Allen, the top 2 quarterbacks this season in fantasy football. And this week, a great matchup coming off a bye at the New York Giants, who I believe they're going to put a lot of points on the board. And this could be Lamar, one of his best games of the season. Drew Lock, he's banged up. We don't know if he's going to play, so I got Tommy DeVito listed. But obviously, you don't want no part of this Giant offense in terms of who's starting at quarterback. The only players who have fantasy values, Malik Neighbors and Tyrone Tracy. So lock in DeVito, easy sits. And this Giant team anyway, they're looking to tank and get a quarterback. And right now, if the season ended today, they have the first pick in the NFL draft. Dallas Cowboys at the Panthers, Cooper Rush is sit, Bryce Young is sit. With a full slate here, these quarterbacks, they just don't have enough upside, even though I could see this being a pretty high-scoring game. Both defenses can't stop anyone, but Cooper Rush, he's been playing decent, I think, since Dak Prescott's been out. But another team like the Dallas Cowboys, 5-8 on the season, they're just trying to get the season ended with. And Cooper Rush, he just hasn't had enough of a high ceiling, even in a good matchup, to put in your lineup. Bryce Young, he's definitely improved after he took a seat on the bench early in the season, watching games on the sidelines and learning from Andy Dalton. And this week, it's not a bad matchup versus the Cowboys, but with a full slate, like I said. And his ceiling's pretty much been 22 fantasy points for Bryce Young. He's a sit for me in this game. New York Jets at the Jaguars. Aaron Rodgers a start. Rodgers finally had a 300-yard game last week in that high-scoring loss at the Miami Dolphins. But when you got wide receivers like Devontae Adams, Garrett Wilson, it makes your job easier. And this week in a matchup with one of the worst teams, if not the worst team in the league, it's pretty close between the Raiders, Giants, and Jaguars. Even though this Jet team, it's been a horrible season, 3-10. I think Rodgers goes out there and he has a good ball game. Mac Jones is one of the worst starting quarterbacks in the NFL is Mac Jones. I know last week they went out there and beat the Tennessee Titans in the lowest scoring game in the NFL this season, 10-6. But Mac Jones, he has no fantasy value. I know this Jet defense hasn't stopped anyone this season as well. Trust Mac Jones. The only guy in this offense I really trust, Brian Thomas Jr., he's a sit. Miami Dolphins at the Texans. This is going to be a high-scoring game. Tua, ever since he returned from concussion, he's been great for this Dolphin offense. And they're back to the high-powered, putting up points, 27-plus points per game every week, it seems like. So Tua and Tyreek Hill locked back in. Jalen Waddle, the last few weeks here, his numbers are starting to go up. And Jonnu Smith, he's been a great option in this passing game, where I believe he's the number 2 option in this passing game for Miami. So Tua, in a big matchup here where this Dolphin team's got to win to keep their playoff hopes alive, he's a start. CJ Stroud a start. Coming off bye week, I think this Texan offense is going to reset a little bit. And we know CJ Stroud, his numbers are way down. We know Collins, he was out for 4 weeks. Stephon Diggs, he's been out a while now. We know he's out for the season. But Stroud coming off bye, getting back into the playbook a little bit here. And a Dolphin defense that can't stop anyone, I would give him a start. Indianapolis Colts at the Denver Broncos, Anthony Richardson, it just hasn't been there for him. And I know he was the 5th to 6th quarterback off the board in most fantasy leagues. He is Anthony Richardson, but I just can't believe in this ball game, even coming off a bye, he's going to put up fantasy numbers and have high upside versus a great defense in the Denver Broncos. So he's a sit. Bo Nix a start. Bo Nix, he's been solid, 18 or more fantasy points the last 3 games here for Bo Nix. So he's locked in with Cortland Sutton, coming off a bye week to really get back into that playbook and refresh this late in the season. And we know this Indianapolis Colts team can't stop anyone. So I think Bo Nix once again goes out there, has a good game. He's a start. With his running ability as well, he can give you weekly 3 or 4 points running the football. Buffalo Bills at the Detroit Lions. This could be a similar type of game to what we saw last week with the Bills and the Los Angeles Rams. So Josh Allen coming off of 3 passing touchdowns, 3 rushing touchdowns. This week, this is going to be an indoor game once again, obviously at Detroit. I believe a lot of points are going to be put on the board. And Josh Allen, he was the number 1 quarterback off the board for a reason, just the versatility and what he could do for fantasy owners. Jared Goff a start. I believe this is the best offense in all pro football when you got guys like Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, Jameson Williams. And this week, like I said, if this is mid-30s, low 40s, it's not going to be obviously shocking at all where these two teams put a lot of points on the board. And this week, Jared Goff in this matchup where it's just going to be up and down the field as a start. Once again, Pittsburgh Steelers at the Philadelphia Eagles. Russell Wilson is sit. I know Wilson, he's played great football, but this is a tough matchup going in there at Philadelphia. And last week, if 2 second-half touchdowns didn't bail out Russell Wilson, he wasn't going to do much versus a mediocre Cleveland Brown defense. So this week with a tougher matchup, and I think in the trenches, if Pittsburgh wants to win this game, they're going to go a lot with Najee Harris and obviously play good defense, and that's been their game script for majority of the season for the most part. But he's a sit. Jalen Hurts to start. I know he's getting a lot of heat from some Eagle fans where they barely won that ball game versus the Carolina Panthers last week was Philadelphia. But Jalen Hurts, he's putting up the numbers, and his floor's pretty much been 18 fantasy points. And then there's weeks he goes out there and he's got that 30, 35 point upside is Jalen Hurts. So this week, even in a tough matchup versus Steelers, point of the year, you drafted Hurts as the 3rd or 4th quarterback off the board, and you got to stick with him. Like, it's been a bad year for Hurts. He's still putting up pretty elite numbers. Patriots at the Arizona Cardinals, Drake May. It's been a decent rookie season for him. Another quarterback who has good running upside, no doubt about it, is Drake May. But this week at the Cardinals and with a full slate, he's a sit. Kyler Murray a start. Some weeks you're going to get big weeks for Murray, and some weeks it's going to be that 10-12 fantasy point day for Murray. But this Patriot defense, they haven't stopped anyone all season long. Murray and Harrison got to get back on the same page. Trey McBride, it's been a big season for him. And this week I think Murray goes out there and has one of his better games of the year. Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the Chargers. Baker Mayfield, he's locked back in as a start each and every week. Him and Mike Evans have been hitting on big plays. Rashad White out of the backfield, one of the better receiving backs in the league. And Cade Otton's been a solid tight end for the majority of the season. And we saw Jalen McMillan emerge last week with 2 touchdowns. So this week, in a potential high-scoring game at the Chargers, I got Baker as a start. Justin Herbert a start. Herbert, he's been locked in for the majority of the season. I know last week it was a down game, no doubt about it, and a tough loss and the regulation at the Kansas City Chiefs. But Herbert, we know he's a gunslinger. Hopefully Ladd McConkey is back, and we know this Tampa Bay secondary can't stop anyone as well. So this week he's a start. For me, is Justin Herbert, even though he came off a bad game last week. Green Bay Packers at the Seahawks. Jordan Love, he's a start. I know his numbers haven't been elite like you thought they would be this season. He hasn't obviously been 100%, dealing with a groin, dealing with a nagging amount of injuries this season. But this week it could be a high-scoring game at Seattle, and Green Bay knows they got to put points on the board like they did last week if they want to compete with this Seahawks team. So last week a tough loss, 34-31. Obviously it was versus the Detroit Lions, but I think Jordan Love gets back once again and puts in a decent performance. Geno Smith, a borderline option. I know this Packer defense, they've definitely been leaky versus good offenses this season. But Geno Smith, I just don't believe the upside is all that great. We saw last week Zach Charbonnet have the monster game, over 30 fantasy points in PPR leagues. This running game's done a lot this season. I know Jackson Smith and the Jigba is definitely making big plays, but DK Metcalf, let's be honest, his numbers have been down over the last 3 or 4 weeks. Noah Fant's not giving them much, and Tyler Lockett hasn't done much as well. So pretty much JSN, number 1 target in the offense, and the guy who's getting the majority of the numbers. First of 2 Monday night games, Chicago Bears at the Vikings. Caleb Williams to start. Caleb Williams, he's just been finding his way into production in a lot of garbage time, and it wouldn't be surprising to me once again if they're chasing points where there's garbage time in this one. So we saw a few weeks ago, he led a nice comeback versus the Minnesota Vikings where they lost 30-27 in overtime. But that was one of the best games of the year for Caleb Williams. So he's familiar with this defense. This is a division game, and I think anything can happen. And I think Williams, one way or the other, could at least put up 18-20 fantasy points. He's a start. Sam Darnold will start, coming off a monster 5-touchdown performance last week versus the Falcons. And this week here for Sam Darnold, it's a good matchup versus the Bears, where their secondary has been a problem over the last few weeks here. And when you got guys like Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison now, who's really breaking out, coming off 133 yards and 3 touchdowns in last week's game versus the Falcons, you got to have confidence with Darnold in the lineup in the final game of the week. Atlanta Falcons at the Raiders. Kirk Cousins, I know the numbers have been horrible, but I'm just going off matchup here, and this is a good matchup at the Vegas Raiders. Indoor ball game. Raiders defense can't stop anyone. Kirk Cousins still has great weapons that can help him out and put yards on the board with yard after catch with guys like Drake London, Darnell Mooney, Ray McLeod, and even Kyle Pitts to an extent, even though his numbers have been non-existent a majority of the season. So this week with a good matchup, I would roll the dice and start Kirk Cousins, Aiden O'Connell, Desmond Ridder, whoever's going to start in this one, because O'Connell's banged up. He got out of the game when injury and Ridder came in. And even in a good matchup versus a Falcon defense that isn't any good, I wouldn't trust these 2 quarterbacks, especially in a playoff spot here. So that's quarterback start sit every matchup for Week 15 of the fantasy football season.